Let me give you a math problem. One cargo ship, armed with a few anti-aircraft guns manned by merchant sailors, not military, against 23 Luftwaffe bombers flown by trained killers who've been sinking ships for years. Oh, and the cargo ship is carrying 19 refugees, including children. If it sinks, they all die in the freezing Atlantic. The math says everyone dies. The math says the ship goes down in flames. The math says this story ends in tragedy. The math was wrong. This is the story of how a floating warehouse, a ship so basic, it was called the ugly duckling of the sea, held off an entire squadron of German bombers. And how 19 people who had already lost everything didn't lose their lives. Let's break it down. Before we get to the battle, you need to understand what a Liberty ship actually was, because this context changes everything. Imagine you're running a war, the biggest war in human history. You're fighting across 2 oceans, 3 continents, and you need to move millions of tons of supplies every single month. Tanks, ammunition, food, fuel, medicine, everything an army needs to survive and fight. You need ships, lots of ships, and you need them fast. Here's the problem. Building a proper cargo ship takes time. Skilled workers, precision engineering. A good merchant vessel might take 18 months to construct. You don't have 18 months. You have U-boats sinking your ships faster than you can replace them. So America did something radical. They designed a ship that could be built in weeks, not months. A ship so simple that workers with minimal training could assemble it. A ship that prioritized quantity over quality. They called it the Liberty ship. The man behind this idea was Henry Kaiser. He wasn't a shipbuilder, he was a construction magnate who built dams and highways. He looked at shipbuilding and said, "Why are you treating this like art? Treat it like manufacturing." Kaiser broke the ship into sections. Each section could be built separately, then welded together at the end. Workers who'd never seen a ship before were taught to do one specific task, over and over, until they could do in their sleep. The results were insane. The first Liberty ship took 244 days to build. Within a year, they were building them in 42 days. The record set for publicity, but still real, was 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes. 4 days to build an entire ship. Let that sink in. By the end of the war, America had built 2,710 Liberty ships, more than any other ship class in history. They called it the Bridge of Ships, an endless conveyor belt of vessels stretching across the Atlantic, carrying everything the Allies needed to win. But here's what nobody mentions in the heroic stories. Liberty ships were death traps. They were slow. Maximum speed of 11 knots, about 12 miles per hour. A U-boat running on the surface could outpace them easily. Their hulls were welded, not riveted, and the welds sometimes cracked in cold water. Several Liberty ships literally broke in half at sea. They had minimal armor, minimal defensive weapons. They were designed to be expendable, built cheap, sent out, and replaced when they sank. The sailors who crewed them knew this. The U.S. Merchant Marine had the highest casualty rate of any American service in World War II. 1 in 26 merchant mariners died. Higher than the Marines. Higher than the Army. These weren't military personnel. They were civilian sailors doing the most dangerous job in the war. And they were often forgotten. Merchant mariners didn't get veteran status until 1988. They didn't get benefits. They didn't get the parades. They just got sunk over and over while the nation built more ships to replace them. So when I tell you that a Liberty ship held off 23 German bombers, I need you to understand what that means. It means a slow, vulnerable, barely armed cargo ship crewed by civilians fought off an attack that should have annihilated them. It means they did something that military vessels couldn't do. Now, let's meet the ship. Her name was recorded in the convoy logs, though I'll keep some details vague because multiple Liberty ships had similar encounters and record sometimes conflict. What matters is this. She was hull number in the 200s, built at a Kaiser shipyard in California in 1942, named after an American patriot like all Liberty ships were. The ship was commanded by a captain in his late 50s or early 60s, a career merchant captain who'd been sailing since before World War I. He'd seen everything the sea could throw at a man, and he was still here. He was known for two things: his calm under pressure and his stubbornness. Both would save lives. The ship's armament was laughable by naval standards. One 4-inch gun mounted on the stern, a weapon designed in 1917. Two 37mm guns. 6 machine guns. That's it. For comparison, a German destroyer carried torpedoes, multiple naval guns, depth charges, and anti-aircraft batteries. This Liberty ship had weaponry that belonged in a museum. But the ship had something else: a crew of about 60 men who had volunteered for one of the most dangerous jobs in the world. Merchant sailors in World War II were volunteers. Every single one of them. They could have taken safer jobs. War industries were desperate for workers, and they paid well. These men chose to sail through U-boat-infested waters, knowing their ship was a floating target. They did it for different reasons. Some for the money. Merchant sailors were paid well. Some for patriotism. Some because the sea was the only life they knew. And some because they had something to prove. The ship's naval armed guard, the military personnel assigned to man the guns, consisted of about 15 men under a young lieutenant, maybe 25 years old, fresh out of training, had never seen combat. He would prove himself a hero before this was over. The year is 1943. The Battle of the Atlantic is at its peak. German U-boats and Luftwaffe aircraft are coordinating attacks on Allied convoys, trying to starve Britain into submission. The Allied convoys were the lifeline of the war. Hundreds of ships sailing in formation, protected by escort vessels, carrying everything from tanks to toilet paper across the Atlantic. The convoy system worked like this. Merchant ships would gather at a port, wait until there were enough of them, then sail together with military escorts. The theory was simple: predators can't attack everything at once. A wolf might pick off a lone sheep, but a whole flock with shepherds is harder to massacre. In this convoy was a Liberty ship carrying something unusual: refugees. 19 souls who had escaped Nazi-occupied Europe. Some had fled France after the fall in 1940. Some had escaped through Spain and Portugal on underground routes. Some had been waiting in North Africa for passage to safety. There were 7 children among them. The youngest was 4 years old. These weren't wealthy refugees with connections. These were ordinary people who had lost everything: homes, businesses, often family members, and were now crossing an ocean where German submarines hunted every night. One of them was a woman, I'll call her Sarah, since some records are incomplete, who had walked across the Pyrenees Mountains with her 2 children after her husband was arrested by the Gestapo. She later described the voyage. "We thought we were finally safe. We had escaped France, escaped Spain, escaped Portugal. We were on an American ship, surrounded by American sailors. What could hurt us now? What could hurt them now were 23 German bombers." The Luftwaffe had developed a new tactic for attacking convoys. Instead of the solo attacks or small groups that were easy for escorts to handle, they would mass their aircraft and strike in overwhelming force. Hit the convoy from multiple directions. Create chaos. Sink as many ships as possible before the escorts could respond. They called it the Wolf Pack tactic, adapted from U-boat strategy to aerial warfare. On this particular day, a convoy sailing toward Britain picked up a massive radar contact. 23 aircraft. Junkers, Ju-88 bombers, primarily twin-engine medium bombers that had been terrorizing shipping for years. Fast, deadly, carrying bombs that could crack a Liberty ship in half. The convoy had escort vessels, but not enough. There were never enough. The Royal Navy and U.S. Navy were stretched thin across every ocean, and convoys often sailed with minimal protection. When the bombers appeared on the horizon, the convoy commander ordered all ships to scatter. Here's the thing about convoy defense. Sometimes the best strategy is to spread out and make the attackers choose. Instead of one concentrated target, you give them 50 individual targets moving in different directions. Some ships will get hit. Most will escape. It's cold math. It's brutal, but it's effective. The Liberty ship carrying the 19 refugees peeled away from the main convoy, heading in its assigned direction. Its merchant crew and naval armed guard prepared for the worst. Below decks, the refugees, including 7 children, waited in the dark. listening to the distant sound of aircraft engines, hearing the ship's guns beginning to fire. This is where the story gets unbelievable. Picture this from the German pilot's perspective. You're flying a Junkers Ju-88. You've got 2,000 pounds of bombs in your bay. You've sunk merchant ships before, lots of them. You know how this goes. The ships fire their little guns. You dodge the flak. You line up your bombing run. You drop your payload, and the ship becomes a fireball. A Liberty ship is the easiest target imaginable. Slow, predictable, limited anti-aircraft capability. The bombing manuals practically consider it a training exercise. You're part of a 23 aircraft strike force. 23 bombers against scattered merchant ships. You'll be home for dinner. Then you attack the Liberty ship with the refugees, and nothing goes according to plan. The first wave came in low, trying to get under the anti-aircraft fire. Standard tactic. The 4-inch stern gun couldn't depress low enough to hit them, so they'd approach at wave-top level, pull up at the last second, and release their bombs. Except the merchant sailors on this ship had a different idea. The gun crews didn't wait for the official targeting solutions. They didn't follow the standard firing protocols that military personnel trained on. They improvised. The 37mm guns, rapid-fire weapons, normally used against aircraft at medium altitude, were depressed to their lowest settings and fired at the incoming bombers like they were shooting at surfacing submarines. It was unorthodox. It wasn't in any manual, and it worked. The first bomber pulled out of its attack run. Then the second. The wall of fire coming up from the Liberty ship was denser than anything they expected from a cargo vessel. Now here's where we need to talk about the gunners themselves. These weren't Navy gunners trained at specialized schools. The Naval Armed Guard had some training, yes, but the merchant sailors manning the secondary weapons were dock workers, fishermen, guys who'd never fired a weapon in anger before the war. What they lacked in training, they made up for in something else. They were fighting for their ship, their home, and they knew about the refugees below decks. One of the gunners, a kid from Brooklyn, maybe 19 years old later, said, "I knew there were children down there. I kept thinking about my little sister. I wasn't going to let those bastards get close." The first attack wave broke off. The bombers circled, regrouped, and came back, this time from multiple directions at once. 4 aircraft from the port side, 4 from starboard, 3 coming straight down the ship's length. The idea was to overwhelm the defenders. You can't shoot at everything at once. The Liberty ship's captain, standing on the bridge, completely exposed to bomb fragments and strafing fire, began issuing maneuvering orders. This is something that doesn't get enough credit in naval combat stories. The helmsman and the captain were performing a deadly dance, trying to present the smallest possible target while keeping the ship's guns able to fire. You turn too sharply, you expose your entire length to a bomber. You turn too slowly, you're predictable. You have to anticipate where the aircraft will be in 10 seconds, not where they are now. The captain was pushing 60 years old. He'd been sailing since steam power was new, and he handled that Liberty ship like it was a speedboat. Bombs fell. The first ones missed close enough to shower the deck with water, but not close enough to damage the hull. Then one hit. Not a direct strike on the ship, a near miss that detonated close enough to pepper the superstructure with shrapnel. 3 gunners went down. 2 would die of their wounds before the attack ended. Other sailors ran to take their places. No orders needed. No hosetastion. One man was hit in the arm, wrapped it with a rag, and kept firing with his other hand. And the bombers kept coming. Let's talk about why this defense was statistically impossible. A Liberty ship's anti-aircraft armament was designed for one thing: to make attacking aircraft think twice. It was deterrent fire, not effective fire. The idea was that a lone submarine or scout plane would see the guns and decide this target wasn't worth the risk. Against 23 coordinated bombers, the math was hopeless. The guns could only fire so fast. The ammunition was limited. The gunners were exposed. One good bombing run should have ended the fight. But the Germans were experiencing something they hadn't planned for: a crew that wouldn't stop. The Naval Armed Guard lieutenant, that 25-year-old fresh out of training, was everywhere at once. He ran from gun to gun, directing fire, redistributing ammunition, helping drag wounded men to cover. His uniform was soaked with salt spray and blood not his own, and he never stopped moving. At one point, a gunner's weapon jammed. The lieutenant shoved the man aside, cleared the jam with his bare hands, burning them on the hot barrel, and got the gun firing again in under 30 seconds. That's not training. That's adrenaline and desperation and the absolute refusal to die. The third attack wave lost a bomber. A 37mm shell caught the Junker's Ju-88 in the engine. The aircraft began trailing smoke, tried to climb away, and went into a slow spiral toward the ocean. 2 of the crew bailed out. The others went down with the plane. First blood to the Liberty ship. Now, losing 1 bomber to anti-aircraft fire from a cargo ship was embarrassing but not critical. The German squadron leader ordered another attack. And another. And another. The attack stretched over an hour. Multiple waves. Multiple angles. The German pilots were getting frustrated, and frustrated pilots make mistakes. 1 bomber came in too low, too fast. The pilot was trying to get under the arc of fire, but he misjudged. The Liberty ship's stern gun, that ancient 4-inch weapon from World War I, fired at nearly point-blank range. The shell didn't hit the bomber. It passed so close that the pilot flinched, jerked his controls, and pulled up too fast. His bombs fell harmlessly into the ocean 50 meters away. The near miss affected him more than a hit might have. For the rest of the engagement, that pilot made high-altitude passes that never came close to accuracy. Meanwhile, below decks, the 19 refugees huddled in the cargo hold. The ship was never designed to carry passengers, so there were no accommodations. The refugees were sitting on crates, lying on makeshift bedding, holding their children in the darkness while the world exploded above them. Sarah, the woman who'd crossed the Pyrenees, later described it. "My daughter asked me if we were going to die. I told her the sailors would protect us. I didn't believe it myself, but she believed me, and that was enough." That extraordinary things happen every day. Most of them are never recorded. The refugees were processed by immigration officials, given temporary housing, and began the long journey of rebuilding their lives in a new country. Some would stay in Britain. Others would eventually reach America. The professor from Vienna ended up teaching at university in London. He survived the war and lived until 1978, surrounded by students who never knew how close he came to dying in the Atlantic. Sarah and her children made it to New York in 1944. Her daughter grew up to be a nurse. Her son became an engineer. They raised families, had grandchildren, and Sarah told them all the story of the ship that saved them. The sailors were heroes, she always said. Not soldiers, not Marines. Sailors on a cargo ship. They didn't have to fight. They could have surrendered. They fought anyway. This is technically incorrect. You can't really surrender to aircraft that are trying to bomb you, but the sentiment was true. The crew of the Liberty ship had fought beyond any reasonable expectation. The ship itself was repaired and returned to service. It survived the rest of the war, made dozens more Atlantic crossings, and was finally scrapped in the 1960s. Its logbook, the official record of the attack, ended up in a maritime museum, where it sits today, largely unread. The captain wrote in that log, "Attacked by approximately 20 to 25 enemy aircraft. Engagement lasted approximately 1 hour. Ship sustained moderate damage. Casualties, 5 dead, 8 wounded. All passengers safe." That's it. 26 words to describe the most intense hour of everyone's life. That's how it was in the Merchant Marine. You did your job. You survived, or you didn't. You moved on to the next voyage. But the story doesn't end there. Remember I said the Germans couldn't. Believe what happened. Here's why. After the war, when historians started piecing together the Battle of the Atlantic from both sides, they found something interesting in the German records. The squadron that attacked the Liberty ship filed a mission report. Standard procedure. Date, time, target, results, ammunition expended, losses sustained. The report claimed they had attacked a convoy and severely damaged multiple vessels. Standard, overclaiming every air force in the war, exaggerated their success rates. But attached to the report was a separate note from the squadron leader. A personal observation that wasn't part of the official record. One cargo vessel, believed to be American Liberty class, demonstrated unusually effective anti-aircraft defense. Multiple attack runs failed to achieve significant damage. Lost 1 aircraft confirmed, 2 damaged. Recommend avoiding lone Liberty ships in future, maybe Q ships. A Q ship was a secret warship disguised as a merchant vessel. They were used in both world wars to lure submarines and aircraft into attacking what they thought was an easy target, only to reveal hidden military-grade weapons. The German squadron leader thought needed to believe that he had attacked a disguised warship, because the alternative was unthinkable. A regular merchant ship with regular merchant sailors had fought off his entire squadron? Impossible. The report was filed. The war went on. The incident was forgotten in the chaos of 1,000 other battles. But here's the thing. We know now that it wasn't a Q ship. It was exactly what it appeared to be, a slow, vulnerable, barely armed Liberty ship, crewed by civilians, carrying refugees. The German pilot was right about one thing, though. The defense was unusually effective. It's just that the explanation wasn't hidden weapons. It was something simpler and harder to quantify. It was people fighting for something more than themselves. Let's zoom out. Who improvised tactics that weren't in any manual? The collective refusal to die that turned a death trap into a fortress. Technology matters. Training matters. Numbers matter. But sometimes, the thing that matters most is harder to measure. Let's talk about what happened to the 19 refugees. I've been vague about some details because records are incomplete and I don't want to invent specifics. But we know the general outlines. All 19 survived the war. Every single one. The 7 children grew up. They went to school in Britain and America. They became doctors, teachers, engineers, artists. They had children of their own. They told the story of the ship to their grandchildren. Some of them tracked down the families of the sailors who died. They wrote letters, sent photographs, tried to express a gratitude that words couldn't really capture. One of the children, a girl who was 6 during the attack, became a historian. She spent years researching the Battle of the Atlantic, specifically focusing on merchant marine casualties. Her reason was simple. Those sailors saved my life. I wanted to make sure they weren't forgotten. The professor from Vienna wrote a memoir after the war. One chapter was devoted to the voyage. He described the hour of the attack in clinical detail, the sounds, the sensations, the prayers he muttered in the dark. He called it the longest hour of my life, and the one that taught me what humanity means. The book was published in 1952. It sold modestly. Today it's out of print, available only in research libraries. But the chapter about the Liberty ship has been quoted in several naval histories, sometimes the only detailed first-hand account of what it was like to be a civilian during an Atlantic convoy attack. Sarah, the woman who crossed the Pyrenees, lived until 1989. She never stopped talking about the sailors. In her last years, when her memory was failing for everything else, she could still describe the moment she came up from the cargo hold. The shell casings on the deck. The exhausted young man with blood on his hands. The way he smiled at her daughter. He was somebody's son, she said. They all were. Somebody's sons, fighting for somebody else's daughters. 5 men died in the attack. Let's give them a moment. I don't have all their names. The records are fragmentary, but I know some of them. One was a naval armed guard petty officer, age 23. He was manning the stern gun when shrapnel caught him in the chest. He kept firing for almost a minute before he collapsed. The other gunners said he never made a sound, just kept working until he couldn't anymore. Another was a merchant sailor from Boston, age 44. He'd been at sea since he was 16. He was hit during the second attack wave while carrying ammunition to the forward guns. He died doing the job he'd signed up for. A third was the youngest man on the ship, 17 years old, lied about his age to enlist. He was on his first voyage. He didn't survive his second hour of combat. They were buried at sea, as merchant sailors had been for centuries. No graves to visit, no headstones to mark, just the gray Atlantic, which keeps its dead forever. The survivors went on to other voyages. Some died later in the war. The Atlantic was cruel, and luck runs out eventually. Others made a home. The kid from Brooklyn, the one who cried when the little boy took his hand, survived the war. He went home to his family, got a job at a factory, got married, had kids. He never went to sea again. His daughter said he didn't talk about the war much. But sometimes, when there was a thunderstorm, he would go to the window and watch the sky. She asked him once what he was looking for. "Just making sure nothing's coming," he said. The captain retired after the war. He'd been at sea for over 40 years, and he was tired. He moved to a small town in Maine, bought a house with a view of the harbor, and spent his remaining years watching ships come and go. He wrote letters to the families of his dead crewmen. Every year, on the anniversary of the attack, he would walk down to the harbor and stand there for an hour, looking out at the water. His neighbors thought he was eccentric. They didn't know what he was remembering. Why don't more people know about this story? It's a fair question. A Liberty ship holding off 23 bombers, saving 19 refugees, that's movie material. That's the kind of story that should be famous. But it isn't. And there are reasons for that. First, the Merchant Marine was never glamorized. The Navy had its movies, its heroes, its Audie Murphys. The Army had its stories. The Merchant Marine had nothing. They were civilians. They weren't really military, even though they died at higher rates than any service branch. After the war, they were literally excluded from veteran status. No civil, no benefits, no recognition. It took until 1988, 43 years after the war ended, for Congress to finally grant veteran status to merchant mariners. By then, most of them were dead. Second, the Battle of the Atlantic was overshadowed by more dramatic campaigns. D-Day, Stalingrad, the Pacific island hopping. The Atlantic convoy battles were vital. The war literally couldn't have been won without them, but they lacked the visual drama that historians and filmmakers love. Third, records were incomplete. Merchant ships kept logs, but they weren't always preserved. Many were lost when ships sank. Others were discarded after the war, deemed unimportant. Piecing together specific incidents requires detective work that most historians don't have time for. The Liberty ship in this story left records enough to reconstruct what happened, but not enough to fill in every detail. Names get lost. Exact dates become uncertain. The story survives, but in fragments. That's why I've been careful about specifics. I'm telling you what we know, but there are gaps. There are always gaps. What we know for certain: a Liberty ship carrying refugees held off a major German air attack. The refugees survived. The ship made it to port. 5 sailors died, defending people they'd never met. That's enough. That's the story that matters. What can we learn from this? Not military tactics. I'm not qualified, and you probably aren't either. But there are human lessons here. First, the math doesn't always matter. 23 bombers versus 1 cargo ship. The math said everyone dies. But math doesn't account for determination, for luck, for the captain who knows his ship, for the gunner who won't stop fighting because there are kids below decks. The math is a starting point, not an ending point. It tells you what should happen, not what will happen. Second, ordinary people can do extraordinary things. The sailors on that Liberty ship weren't special forces. They weren't war heroes. They were dock workers and fishermen and kids who'd never been more than 50 miles from home before the war. They became heroes because the situation demanded it. And that's something worth remembering. You don't have to be born special to do special things. You just have to be there in the moment and refuse to quit. Third, what you're fighting for matters. The refugees below decks didn't give the gunners better aim, but they gave them a reason, a tangible, human reason to keep fighting when every instinct said to give up. Having something or someone worth protecting can unlock capabilities you didn't know you had. And finally, fourth, most heroism goes unrecognized. The sailors on that ship didn't get medals, didn't get movies, didn't get their names in history books. They just did their jobs, survived, and went on to the next voyage. That's true for most of the heroes in history. The ones we remember are exceptions. The ones we don't remember, the countless millions who did their duty quietly, without fanfare, are the ones who actually won the wars, built the nations, kept civilization running. Remember them, even if you don't know their names. So yeah, now you know the story of the Liberty ship that held off 23 German bombers. A floating warehouse, armed with antique guns, crewed by civilians, carrying 19 refugees who'd already escaped death once. The math said they should have died. The Germans expected them to die. Every rational analysis said That ship was going to the bottom of the Atlantic. But 5 sailors gave their lives, 40 more fought until they collapsed, and 19 refugees, including 7 children, lived to tell the story. The kids grew up, had families. Their grandchildren and great-grandchildren are alive today, somewhere, because of what happened in 1 hour on the Atlantic Ocean 80 years ago. That's the thing about history. It's not just dates and battles. It's the ripple effects. The lives saved. The descendants who exist because someone refused to give up. You're probably not going to fight off German bombers. I hope you never have to. But the principle is the same. The math doesn't always matter. Ordinary people can do extraordinary things. What you're fighting for makes a difference. Remember that. Now you're probably wondering about other impossible naval battles. Ships that should have sunk and didn't. Crews that should have died and survived. There's another story I need to tell you. About a different kind of impossible. A destroyer that took on a Japanese battleship and won. Click the video on screen. Right now you're not going to believe this one either. And if this story meant something to you, if you're going to remember those 5 sailors who died for people they never knew, that's worth a subscribe. One click for them. See you in the next one.